Hey, what's up, YouTube? This is Biker Caliente, and I'm here in the Caliente garage. And in this video, we're going to talk about another boat recall bad experience for the Honda Goldwing. So here we go again. Stay tuned to this video. We got a lot to unpack and talk about right here in the Caliente garage. Hey, what's up, YouTube? This is Biker Caliente. I'm here in the Caliente garage, and I'm on the phone with one of my viewers that want to share his experience of his Honda Goldwing boat recall. Are you there?
Yeah, Chris, I'm here.
Okay. All right. So Goldwing, man, how long you been watching my videos?
Actually, not that long. I probably, a month or so. It hasn't been very long, but I've watched a lot of them. I enjoy watching them.
Okay. Well, here recently, I've been, putting up the videos about the Goldwing recall nightmare, and you wanted to share your experience with my viewers. I want you to actually share your experience with my viewers. So,
okay.
What year is your Goldwing?
It's a 2018.
2018. Okay.
Yeah, it's very low mileage when I bought it. It only had like 2,000 miles on it. Currently, it has like 5,400 on it. So it's even though it's 5 years old, it's almost like new.
Right.
But when this recall came out, I wasn't sure how intense it was going to be, or how long it was going to take, or how major it was, or kind of like the fuel tank recall.
Okay.
So I called them, and I called them in February, right after I got the recall in the mail. And hindsight, looking at it, it kind of makes me feel like that, being one of the first to take it into a dealership,
right?
Maybe I kind of feel like a guinea pig, or where that they're in that learning curve. I guess that's what I'm trying to say, because a lot of dealerships had never tore down a bike that far to get to a recall. It's a pretty major recall.
Right.
So I take the bike in and dropped it off, had the recall sheet with me, and he goes, okay, yeah, we'll take care of it. So a couple of weeks later, I just called them to find out where they were on it, and they were having some issues. They had broken the sensor.
Okay.
That goes into that gear. It's a plastic sensor. I guess it's like a couple inches long, about the size of an ink pen.
Okay.
And they broke the tip off of it. And I asked them, I said, well, where's the tip? Well, we got the tip out. None of it's in the motor. Okay, I trust them. That's fine. So they had to order a new sensor.
Okay.
That came in, and they got it all put together. Called me and said, well, your bike is ready. Okay, I'll pick it up. Went and got the bike, brought it home. And after the bike warmed up. When I started it at the dealership, you know, when you start your bike, how the choke kind of revs the RPM
Right.
until it warms up and it goes down. Actually, when the RPM was a little higher, when I was pulling it onto the trailer, I really couldn't hear anything that sounded bad at all.
Okay.
And I got it home, took it off the trailer, drove it down the road, and came back. Well, by then it's warmed up. And when I stopped and the bike was at idle, I could hear like something rattling or something loose
Okay.
at idle. If you give a little bit of gas, the noise went away.
Okay.
You let go of the gas, and you hear this fairly loud noise, which I knew was not right. So I called them. They said, well, bring it back over. We'll take a look at it. Well, took it back. A couple of weeks go by. I called them. They said, well, you know, found out that, you know, there's a special tool
Right.
that has to be used.
How much time?
And
How much time it went by? So you took it in there. They had it a couple weeks. You got the bike back, and then you started hearing this noise, and then you took it back in. Is
I
that
took it back the very next day.
the next day? Okay, so that's
Yeah.
so that's about 2 weeks has gone by at that point, and then they
Yeah,
kept it another 2 weeks.
Yeah, it was another 2 weeks.
Okay.
So I called them, and they said, well, found out there was springs in behind this gear,
Yes.
and one of them had broke, and they need to replace the springs.
Okay.
So they reordered. I don't know if they ordered all 3 springs or just the one spring.
Right.
But they called and said, well, they sent the wrong spring. The gauge of the spring is too heavy. So we're going to go ahead and just order all 3 new springs.
Okay.
I said, okay, that's fine. And we have the tool to make all this right, blah, blah, blah. I said, okay. So a couple of weeks go by, you know, I'm not hearing anything from them. Called them. They said, you know, we're having all kinds of trouble getting these springs on. You know, they're really, you know, you got to almost stand on your head to get under there to put these springs on.
Okay.
And so I called them a couple of weeks later. You know, by now they've got the bike like 6 weeks. And so after they gave me well, we haven't gotten it yet. The sound is not as bad as it was.
Right.
But we want to make sure the sound is gone.
Okay.
And I think to myself, how does it sound like it's not as bad as it was? What's that mean? You know, my thought was when they slipped those gears, which they did, that released the tension of those 3 springs behind that gear.
Right.
And I was afraid that one of them, or ever how many of them, fell down into the engine.
Okay.
And on the instructions that Honda gives the dealers, it says if gears slip and the springs lose tension,
Right.
that something could fall down into the engine compartment, and at that point, the engine has to be removed in order to fix it.
Right.
And that says it right on page whatever of these instructions that the dealers get.
Yeah. Stand by 1 second. I'm gonna pull this page up. Okay. Here we go. And I'm going to blow this up so my viewers can see this. It says important. It's right here. If the tool is not used and the primary drive gear assembly separates, the springs or other parts can fall into the engine and will require the engine to be completely removed and disassembled to reinstall the primary gear assembly. And that is on page 3 of 30. So I just wanted to just show the viewers there in black and white what it says. But go on with your story there, Goldwing man.
So when they told me that the sound was not as bad as it was, the first thought come to my mind is like, well, what's going on here? Did the spring fall down into the engine where the gears are, and it's being chewed up, into slivers of metal?
Right.
And the more you run it, the more it chews up whatever fell in there. The more it chews it up until the remnants of it is laying in the bottom of your oil pan. And now the sound is gone.
Right.
Because it's like putting something in a blender and turning it off. It's going to chew it up.
Right.
So several weeks went by, and it was close to 2 months. And I even called Honda. Well, let me finish the other story, me picking it up. So I go to pick the bike up, and I tell him my concerns. And he said, no. He said, we replaced all 3 springs. They're new springs. The tension is put back where it shouldn't be, and the bike is not. I said, well, what's that part where it says the motor must be removed if the gear slip and parts may fall down in there? He goes, that it doesn't have to be removed. You can get to those springs and replace those springs without removing the engine.
So let me ask you this, Goldwing man. So you think that when they did your recall, you think that maybe they didn't lock those gears into place with the special tools and the springs fell down in the engine, and that's why you was hearing that noise?
That was my thought when I heard the noise, because I had researched it and read up on it, and the page you're showing everybody, I read that, and it's like, well, if the gears slip and the springs come loose, they could possibly fall into the engine. Is that what I'm hearing? Or am I hearing loose springs bouncing around on the back of the gear? Are they still attached?
Right.
I didn't know.
Right.
And when I took it back, they said, no, all 3 springs were still attached, and one of them was broke, so they replaced it. So they said nothing fell into the engine. And I said, okay. So I go over to pick it up, and I'm concerned because, I don't want to pick the bike up and something be wrong with it, and, because it wasn't done the correct way.
Right.
And, I'm not trying to say anything bad about any dealers. The place I took it to,
right,
people, they're super nice guys, and I know they're doing their best to get these recalls done.
Right.
I just feel like if I had my time to go over with, I wouldn't have taken it as fast as I did. I would have waited until maybe around this time to take it, so they would have had some experience under their belt and had done several bikes, and they've gotten used to taking them apart, put them back together, and now it's easier because the more you do something, the easier it's going to get.
Correct.
And taking it in February, I feel like it was a little early, and they just hadn't done that many of them. So I was so concerned about it. I called Honda.
Okay.
The Honda number that you actually gave me.
Correct.
And I got this lady on the phone and told her what had happened. And I said, it says in here that the engine at that point needs to be removed, and whatever fell in gotten out. And she goes, well, look, all of our people are certified mechanics or techs, and they know what they're doing. And I said, but it says take the engine out. They didn't do it.
Right.
And she goes, well, just because they didn't take the engine out doesn't mean that they didn't fix it, because a lot of these, we may tell them one thing, and it's kind of up to their discretion. If they're able to fix it a different way, then sometimes they will do that. They don't have to it's not mandatory that they take the engine out.
Right.
It's just that they have to fix the problem.
Right. And it as a result, they may have to take the engine out if they
Yeah,
can't.
they may have to take it out.
Right. Right.
But Honda's not telling them they have to.
Right.
If they can fix it without taking the engine out, Honda allows that.
Right.
So even though it was a tough job for them to get inside of there and put these springs back on, they were able to do it.
Right.
And they guaranteed nothing fell into that engine.
Right.
And I did start it up, and it sounds fine. I drove it. It drives fine. By all indications, it seems okay.
Okay.
But I'm just wondering if anybody else has experienced that what I have, and were they able to put the springs back on without taking the engine out? Because I haven't really heard it from anybody but them. We put the springs back on without removing the engine.
Right.
So I'd like to hear back from some of your viewers that may have had the same experience, that they did put the springs back on without removing the motor.
Right. So
So
let me just make sure that I'm putting this into context for your viewers. They initially said that a sensor broke, and then they said that a spring had to be, or a spring came out. They had to replace it, but they ended up replacing all three springs. But they claimed nothing ever failed in the engine, but you was getting this noise. And
yes,
when you took it back, they supposedly had taken care of everything, but they reassured you that nothing ever failed inside of that engine, is what you're telling me. And now is the bike, is it still making noise, or you don't hear anything at this point?
no, I don't hear anything at this point.
Okay.
And they said that the noise that I heard was the springs were loose.
Okay.
And they were rattling around because they had no tension on the spring.
Right.
And when that gear goes on there, those springs are in a pretty tight area to where, I think if one even came loose, it probably would fit down into the crack to fall down into the engine bay.
Right.
But they said when they got in there, they took all three springs off of it.
Okay.
And put three springs on it.
Right.
But
it went from a boat recall to a sensor to a spring to three springs.
Yes. Before it was correct.
And how much total time went by if you had to add up the total time from the time you initially took it in for the recall up until going through the sensor and springs, and how long did they actually have the bike total time?
Close to 2 months. It was
2 months.
probably 7 or 8 weeks total.
Right.
I just got the bike back a few days ago.
Okay.
And then the bike was taken in February.
Right.
So it's been close to 2 months.
Right.
But they said they had a lot of man hours on this bike, and they said, well, we've done 10, 15 other bikes and hasn't had any problem with them whatsoever.
Okay.
But he said sometimes you run into one that something like this happens, and but I believe that they've gotten to the point where they know what it is they need to do and how to do it, and they're a lot more efficient and a lot faster, and they're not making that mistake. I do believe that I took the bike in too early.
Right.
And they said they had the tool when they first did it.
Okay.
So when I called them back to ask them, about the bike 2 weeks after I took it back after hearing the noise. They said, well, we found out that there's a special tool that you got to have, and you got to have springs. Well, if you found out there was a special tool, then how did you use the tool the first time?
Right. The bulletin that went out says that they need to use the special tools, and that special tools is designed to lock the, I'm assuming, the gear assembly.
Yes.
So it's two tools that they actually use to lock the gears from moving. And it actually had a diagram here. I'm gonna pull up this diagram where it actually shows where to put the this special tool.
Well, there's two parts to that special tool. There's about a 3-inch bolt
Right.
that goes into that small gear. One of the slots on that gear is kind of a oblong, kind of an egg shape.
Right.
That screw, the 3-inch screw goes into that hole and
Correct.
locks down. And then you got your little
Wedge, like a wedge.
Yeah, a little wedge with a wire and looks like a washer on the end of it.
Correct.
But that gets kind of, I guess they tap that down in those gears so that it can't move.
Right.
And then they take out the replacement bolts and put the other one in.
Well,
and then when they torque it down, it locks the gears where they are. And they admitted that they made a mistake.
Okay.
And that the gears did slip. They did tell me that. They said, yeah, the gears did slip.
Okay.
And I mean, they didn't try to not to admit it. They did admit that it did slip, but and that's where the noise was coming from.
Right.
But once they got it back and ordered new springs and put it back on, and I don't know how you put the tension back on the springs. I don't even know how. I have no idea how that works.
Right.
But he said everything is on, everything is tight, nothing fell into the engine.
Okay.
And he said if something had fallen into that engine, you would have known it by now. And I'm thinking, well, what was the noise that I was hearing?
Right.
But it's funny when you rev it up a little bit, like it goes past 1,000 RPM. So you rev it up to 1,200 or 1,500 RPM.
Right.
You couldn't hear anything. It sounded normal. It's only when it was at idle that you heard the clattering noise.
Right.
And he said that's those springs in there that are loose and they're just bouncing around in there.
Now, how many times did you say that they changed your oil, doing this procedure?
Well, they have to change the oil every time they get in there and test it to make sure everything is right. Once the oil has to be drained from the bike in order to do this.
Correct.
And
but how many total times did they drop your oil?
They changed the oil 3 times.
Hold on 1 second. You said they changed your oil 3 times?
Yes.
Okay.
And they also changed the oil filter 3 times.
Okay.
And when he told me that, it kind of puzzled me a little bit. I said, well, why would you change the oil filter 3 times? Well, don't you change the oil filter when you change your oil? Well, yeah, if it's got 3,000 miles on it, I will. But if it was just put on brand new, I wouldn't change the oil filter unless I thought maybe there was something that may have gotten in the oil filter.
Right.
And I'm just checking to make sure that there's no particles that may have, it just seemed a little odd. Maybe it's normal to change the filter every time, regardless of how soon it was, but the very next day, I don't know.
So you're saying they actually dropped the oil 3 times, so they actually went in 3 times, trying to make this correction?
Yeah, apparently they went in and changed the springs out, put it back together, put oil in it, started it, and the sound was still there, but not as bad.
Okay.
And I don't know if that was caused by maybe not enough tension on the springs. I don't know how they put tension back onto the spring. I don't know.
Right.
But this last time, well, I was getting aggravated, and I told him, I said, I'm planning a trip to go to Florida this year during bike week, and I would like to have my bike because, I've got the hotels and everything already scheduled, and I need the bike by Friday. Well, I called them, and they had the bike ready and said it was ready to go. Everything was good.
Okay.
So, and like I said, they did keep the bike for a long time, and but I was just concerned about, when he said we got the springs back on. Well, how did you get the springs back on if you didn't take the motor out? So apparently there is a way to put those springs back onto the bike without removing the engine.
Right.
And Honda says if our techs can find a way to fix the bike, they don't have to follow every line
right
on a recall instruction. If they can find a better way to do it,
right,
they'll find a better way to do it.
Right.
And she said, and if you're not satisfied with that dealer, you're always free to take it to another dealer. Well, how do you take a bike to another dealer after, they had a recall like that? I mean, what are they going to do?
Right.
They're not going to say, well, let me
Right.
take this thing all the way apart
Right.
and check it out, because they don't know.
Right. For anybody that has the Honda Goldwing, for anybody watching this video, if you have had a bad experience, you can file a report with customer relations. I'll be sure to put that number up for my viewers that are watching this video. So at this point, they had your bike, a Goldwing man, for about almost 2 months. It started out with, they said that it was supposed to have been a boat recall, but it was a spring issue. A sensor issue. And then it went from replacing one spring to 3 springs. And how many miles do you have on the bike?
5,400.
5,400.
Yes.
And you called Honda Customer Relations, you filed a complaint, and they said that you could take it to another dealership if you're not happy with the treatment that you're getting.
I didn't file a complaint. I was asking them, you're supposed to follow protocol.
Okay.
About taking the engine out, and she goes, no, not necessarily. They don't have to take the engine out if they can fix it without doing it.
Right.
So they fixed it. They replaced the springs without removing the engine.
Okay. So you just got advice. You pretty much you was advised by them. You didn't file a complaint. Just just got their opinion about what recourse you need to take.
Yes, I called them to see if they had told me, yes, if that gear slips and something could fall down there at that point, if the gear slips, whether they know if something fell down into the engine or not, the engine has to be removed. If she had told me that,
right,
then it would have been a whole different story. I would have gone back and said, no, the engine's going to come out.
Okay.
But she said if they can fix it without removing the engine, that they're certified, and if they can find a better way to fix the engine or fix the problem, we allow that.
Right.
So, which, it makes sense, because, but I was concerned about that when I picked the bike up.
Right.
Because in my mind, I was kind of convinced that something had fallen into that engine. That's why I'm hearing that noise.
Yeah.
But when they said it was just the springs moving around, that's possible.
Right.
You have to trust them. And super nice people, though. I mean, they took a lot of time with me. They were nice. And at the end, when I wasn't happy with the way everything went,
right,
I said, what happens if I take this bike and you got all these metal shavings down into the engine, and 3 months later, piston walls and everything else starts to get, the engine goes bad. He goes, well, first of all, nothing fell down into the engine. I can guarantee you that. And they said, if it will make you feel better, we will buy a 2-year warranty on the bike, and we will pay for it if you don't think, if that would make you feel better. So the fact that they did that, if nothing's going to go wrong in 2 years, it's probably not going to go wrong.
Okay.
And so I got a 2-year warranty on the bike, and
okay.
They didn't have to do that,
Right.
They did, and it made me feel a lot better about the whole situation.
Okay.
And the bike seems to be the way it was. It's quiet.
Okay.
Actually, to be honest with you, when the gears change, they seem to be smoother than they were before.
Okay.
And I don't know if that's because it has new springs on it or what. But this one person said those gears will change even without the springs, but the springs keep it to where it pulls them tight to where when they switch gears, it's a smoother transition, and from first to second, third, fourth, so I think having the new springs on it, it could be just in my head. It felt a little smoother than it did before.
Right. So you're satisfied with the work they perform, but you're not satisfied with how long they kept your bike and the things that they had to do to get it to the point where it is now.
I think my bike was a learning curve for them.
Okay.
The fact that it was one of the first that they ever did.
Okay.
And I believe that the other bikes that are coming into their dealership now is probably going smooth, and they're not having any problems or issues with the recall at all.
Okay.
I think that once dealers, run 4, 5, 10 bikes through their shop, they've done it enough times to where that they feel comfortable with it, and they don't have any big issue with it.
Okay. So go on.
So the bottom line is, it was kind of a pain, and I was stressed out about it, a little upset with them. But at the end of the day, if they're willing to guarantee the bike is going to be okay, and when he said nothing fell down into the engine, I believe what he says, and
okay.
He says if those springs come loose, they rattle. So I'm going to have to go with that, and I don't really feel like that they're lying about it, but at the end of the day, I just wanted to get with you and let everybody know what my experience was, and kind of have them keep an eye out for if that happens. But if they use the tool correctly and lock those gears down, and they take that main replacement bolt out and put the other one in and torque it down where it needs to go and take the tool out,
right,
you're good to go.
Right. You don't think they did that in your situation, or you think that they did that, maybe they didn't do it good enough and it moved?
They said they did do the tool when they first did it.
Okay.
They did use that tool.
Okay.
But for whatever reason, either they didn't have the tool tightened down or the little wedge in between the gears, and the gears did slip. They admit that the gears did slip.
Okay.
But apparently, even if the gears slip, apparently you can fix it. You can replace the springs, and you can put the tension back on them and lock it back down without removing the engine.
Okay. Well, that's good information to know.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I hope nobody has a 2-month wait or go through what I went through. But like I said, right. I think I may have taken it in just a little bit early.
Okay. But your total time from start to finish was about 2 months.
Yes.
Okay. Let me ask you this question. Let me just kind of put you on the spot there. Would you recommend other Goldwing riders to go to the dealership where you went to get your recall performed, or would you probably refer them somewhere else?
Now, I would refer them to them.
Okay.
I think
Okay.
I think they're qualified to do the recall now
Right.
because they've done so many of them at this point. After 2 months, I know there were several bikes in the shop being done while mine was being done.
Okay.
So I think that mine was one of the first, and it was kind of a learning curve for them. And
Okay.
yeah, I wouldn't advise anybody not to go to them. Like I say, they're a good dealership. I haven't had any problems out of them. Super
Okay.
nice people, and I think that they have all intentions to do the best job they can. But things happen. I mean, not every job a dealership takes in goes smoothly.
That's correct. That's
I
correct.
mean, we're all human, and things happen, and they're not going to be perfect every time. So yeah, I would recommend going to them. And if something else happens to my bike, I'll take it back to them.
Okay.
I just feel like that I was one of those learning curve type of bikes on this recall because it was one of the first.
Right. You feel
And
like you took your bike in early, and they actually learned from performing a boat recall on your bike. Unfortunately, they had to keep it, in an extended period of time, and they actually had to, replace the springs and I guess the sensor, and drop the oil 3 times, and they finally got your bike back to you, and everything seems to be fine. But let me ask you this question, and before we end this, um, if there's any recommendation that you could give to a Honda Goldwing owner that's taking their bike in to have the boat recall perform, is there any advice that you would like to give any viewers out there that may be skeptical about taking their bike in, or apprehensive, or is there any advice you would like to give any viewers that's fixing to
well,
have their boat recall performed?
there was nothing wrong with my bike. When I got the recall, the bike ran fine. And before I took it in, I was even thinking they're talking about the boat breaking. And if it breaks, it'd be like a hand grenade. It could just explode the inside of the transmission.
Okay.
But in my mind, I kind of thought, well, that's probably happening to a lot of guys that are maybe drive their bike a little different than I do. Maybe
Okay.
they're giving, they're putting a lot of torque on it. Maybe how young people are, maybe squealing tires or putting a lot of stress on the bike, and it snaps the bolt. A person that's driving it normal, the odds of it breaking, to me was like, it will probably never break with me.
Right.
But on the other hand, I got thinking, if you don't do the recall, I believe if you go to trade your bike in, or you go to sell your bike, with this being a major recall, I think that's probably one of the first questions you're going to get from anybody that's either buying your bike or you're trading the bike in. Has the recall been done? And if the recall hasn't been done, well, there you are.
Okay.
I think it would hurt the value of the bike if the recall is not done. And I would advise everybody to do the recall for that sake, if nothing else.
Okay.
But when they were working on the bike, they said they were literally on the phone with the Honda techs on the phone while they were working on my bike.
Right.
Those springs back in, and they were going step to step. Honda said, "Okay, well, do this now, do this, do that," and he said we were literally on the phone with them when we did this.
Okay. All right. Well.
But I believe at this point, this late into the recall, I think most dealers have done enough of these to where that it's kind of become sort of routine.
Okay.
I did talk to another dealer. They've only done like 2 of them, and everything went smooth. And I asked the guy, I said, I saw on YouTube where they can actually go from the bottom, put it on a rack, and get to it that way. And he goes, yeah, he said, I saw that, but we're going to go by what Honda tells us to do and how to do it. I'm not sure how they go from the bottom and do it, but it does take a lot of time taking the bike apart. That's another thing. You know, the bike's never been taken apart. You know, it's like taking your truck into a dealership and that computer screen, the new trucks. You know, I bought a brand new truck and the phone didn't connect with the truck, and I took it in. They said, well, if we got to replace that screen, it's about a $5,000 screen, and the whole dash has to come out, which I didn't want that, because if you take it apart, you're never going to get it back to factory.
Right.
And I feel like that when you strip a bike down, you're taking all these plastic sides off, and you're tearing everything apart, and you're putting it back together. In my head, I may be wrong, but it seemed like it would never be the same as it was from the factory. But I could be wrong about that. But mine seems tight, so
Okay.
you know.
Right.
But I do believe that anybody who has a bike and they're thinking about maybe not doing a recall because there's nothing wrong with their bike, and you probably won't have anything wrong with it. But it also says that back wheel could lock up if that bolt does break while you're going down the road 50 miles per hour, and it could cause you to crash.
Right.
And you wouldn't want that. So that would always be in the back of my mind. Plus the resale of the bike and what it would do to it if I ever try to get rid of it.
Okay. Well, Goldwing man, I appreciate you sharing your story with me. I'm glad that you had a good turnout and experience with your bike. I'm glad that everything turned out good. Your conversation today is a lot different than it was a few days ago, but I'm glad that they got you taken care of, because initially you was very unhappy with the way things was going. You were unhappy with the way you were being handled. You reached out to Honda, but I'm glad that everything worked out. I'm glad that they got the bike fixed. So it's, you know, I do agree with you. The bike is new. A lot of dealerships are learning more about the bikes. Their technicians are, you know, the more they do it, the better they become. So I do agree with you on that part. I'm just glad that everything worked out for you in the end, because there in the beginning, you know, things was not, it was not looking good. But I'm just glad that they got. I'm glad that they got everything worked out. That's the most important thing.
The first time I talked to you, I was upset because in my head something had fallen into the engine.
Okay.
In my head, they should have taken the engine out. You know,
Right.
I was all this was going through my head.
Right.
But you know, that was my thoughts the first time we talked.
Okay.
But then after talking to them and talking to Honda, and Honda saying they don't necessarily have to take the engine out.
Right.
If they can fix it.
Right.
That made me feel better. And you know, I think at the time they did their best.
Right.
And they did give me a guarantee that for 2 years, if anything goes wrong with the bike, then it's covered.
Okay.
So I hope that anybody else doesn't have to go through this. And you know, I think going through this is going to be rare now that they've done several bikes, and I think most dealerships know how to do it now, and I think they're probably doing a good job.
Right. Well, that's great. The only thing that I recommend to my viewers out there, I recommend to the shops and to the dealers out there, communicate with your customers. You know, anybody out there could have an issue. repairing these bikes. You know, anything man-made is subject to break. Nobody is perfect. We all can make mistakes. Mistakes can be repaired. But if you're a shop, just communicate with your customers, call them, let them know what's going on, keep them in the loop, keep them in the know. Communication goes a long way. And a lot of times, a lot of the other stuff can be worked out. It just takes a little bit of extra communication. But if the customer has to constantly call you, they got to, you know, constantly try to run you down. They got to try to constantly, you know, try to catch up with you. And, you know, you're constantly stringing them along. That's when things get ugly. So I just recommend, you know, to the shops, to the dealerships, just, you know, communicate, you know, call your customers and update them, let them know what's going on. A lot of stuff can be handled with just a phone call. But Goldwing, man, I appreciate you coming on here in the Caliente Garage and sharing your experience. I'm glad that you had a good turnout. Again, if anybody out there, you're getting a boat recall performed, and you don't feel like you are getting a good service, I'm going to put the number up for Honda's customer relations. But a lot of things can be handled with just a phone call. So anyway, I'm not going to take up any more of your time. If you guys like this video, click the like button. If you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. And I'll see you a little bit later out here in the Caliente Garage. Deuces.